Hello and welcome. We are about to embark on a pretty deep dive, a university-level journey into the absolutely revolutionary world of Carl Jung. Together, we're going to trace how he built his incredible model of the psyche, piece by piece, from its very foundations all the way to its most mind-bending ideas. So let's jump right in. So here's our game plan. First, we'll see how Jung started by charting brand new territory. Then we'll look at the tools he built to map the personal psyche. From there, we dive headfirst into his most famous and maybe most important idea, the collective unconscious. Then we're going to push the boundaries with his theory of synchronicity. And finally, we'll wrap up by looking at the incredible legacy he left behind. All right, first stop, charting new territory. I think to really get Jung, you have to picture him as this bold explorer, stepping off the edge of the known map of the mind and into a vast psychological wilderness that nobody had really dared to explore before. And this quote from the man himself just says it all, doesn't it? He saw himself as a pioneer, someone so busy cutting a path through the jungle that he never really had a chance to stop and draw a neat, tidy map of where he'd been. So that's kind of our mission today, to put together the systematic overview that Jung, in his own words, was just too busy discovering to create. And this right here is where you see the sheer scale of his ambition. You know, a lot of his contemporaries, especially Freud, were focused on pathology, on what goes wrong with the mind. But Jung, he was interested in the whole shebang. He wanted to understand the entire psyche, the whole person, not just the parts that were broken. And that meant he had to plunge deep into the unconscious, not as some dark cellar to be afraid of, but as a whole new world just waiting to be explored. Okay, so let's get into it. Any great explorer needs their tools, right? A compass, a map, a sextant. Well, Jung's first job was to build his own psychological toolkit. This is all about how he created those foundational concepts he needed to start mapping the more personal layers of our minds. What I love about this timeline is that you can literally watch his mind at work. You can see the logical chain of discovery. It all kicks off in 1899 with this one key observation. He noticed what he called a future personality trying to emerge from a patient's unconscious. Now, this wasn't just some repressed memory from the past. This was something new. So to dig into that, by 1903, he develops his famous word association experiments, a way to actually measure and quantify what's happening beneath the surface. And what did he find? Those experiments led him straight to the discovery of the feeling-toned complex. You know, those supercharged clusters of emotion we all have. And from there, it was a short leap to noticing how different people reacted, which gave him his theory of types, the introvert and the extrovert. See, each discovery literally becomes the tool for the next one. It's brilliant. And this brings us to a major fork in the road. This is really the heart of why Jung and Freud had their famous split. See, for Freud, the unconscious was basically a dark, dusty basement where we shove all our unwanted stuff, our repressed desires, our personal traumas. It was a problem to be managed. But for Jung, it was so much more. He saw it as a creative matrix, a fertile ground, a wellspring of new potential. In his view, it wasn't just a junk drawer for our personal history. It was the very source from which consciousness itself emerges. And crucially, it contained not just our personal stuff, but universal collective elements too. This wasn't just a new theory, it was a completely different way of seeing what it means to be human. And that radical departure, that idea that the unconscious is more than just personal, well, it leads directly to Jung's single greatest contribution. This is the big one. This is the idea that would define his entire life's work. We are now officially leaving the map of the personal mind and venturing into the universal. We're going into the collective unconscious. So what on earth is it? Well, Jung believed that beneath our personal unconscious, there's a much deeper layer that we are all born with. It's not mine or yours, it's ours. It's a shared psychic inheritance, kind of like the psychic DNA of the entire human species. It's the residue of our ancestors' experiences, passed down through the generations. It's the reason that ancient myths and symbols from cultures that had zero contact with each other can be so unbelievably similar. It's like we're all, without knowing it, drawing water from the same ancient hidden well. Okay, so how does this collective unconscious actually work? Through what Jung called archetypes. Now, we've got to be really clear here, because this is where a lot of people get it twisted. Archetypes are not inherited images or ideas. You aren't born with a full-color photograph of a hero in your head. No, they're more like innate tendencies or patterns of behavior. Think of them as empty blueprints or psychic instincts. They're like an empty folder in a filing cabinet labeled Mother or Hero. The universal pattern is there, but it's our own life, our own culture, and our own experiences that fill that folder with content. And here are some of the major players, the key archetypal figures that show up on the stage of our inner world. You've got the shadow. That's everything about ourselves we'd rather not admit to. In a man, you have the anima, his inner feminine soul image. In a woman, the animus, her inner masculine. You've got guiding figures like the wise old man. And then, at the very center of it all, is the self, the archetype of wholeness, the organizing principle that holds the entire system together. These are the timeless characters in the grand drama of our lives, constantly appearing in our dreams, our myths, and our fantasies. This all begs a really powerful question, right? Where do you actually see these patterns today? Well, everywhere. Just think about almost any blockbuster movie you've ever seen. The hero who goes on a journey, the dark villain, the wise mentor who guides them. These aren't just lazy storytelling tropes. Jung would argue they resonate so deeply with us because they're plugging directly into that ancient, collective psychic wiring we all share. Okay, so if you thought the collective unconscious was a pretty wild idea, I'm gonna need you to buckle up, because now we're pushing even further into the unknown. We're arriving at Jung's final, most controversial, and you could argue most profound concept, a principle he called synchronicity, which takes a huge leap beyond the comfort zone of simple cause and effect. And this is the question that sits at the very heart of this idea. We all get causality, right? A causes B. I push a glass, it falls. Simple. But what if there's another kind of connection? What if an inner event, like a dream or a strong feeling, and an outer event in the real world happen at the same time with no possible causal link, yet the connection between them feels overwhelmingly meaningful? That's what Jung wanted to investigate. So how in the world do you even begin to study something like that? Well, Jung got really creative. He set up this fascinating experiment using astrology. And it is super important to understand his goal was not to prove that astrology is real. He was using it as a kind of laboratory for meaning, because it's a system built entirely on the idea of meaningful acausal connections. He took the horoscopes of hundreds of married couples to see if the classic astrological markers for marriage showed up more often than pure chance would allow. And here's what he found. Now, statistically speaking, the results were nothing special. The numbers fell within the normal bounds of chance. A regular scientist would have just tossed the results in the bin. But, and this is the entire point, look at the pattern that chance created. In the first group, the top result was a sun-moon conjunction. In the second, moon-moon. In the third, ascendant-moon. Now, for an astrologer, this is absolutely jaw-dropping because the sun, the moon, and the ascendant are the three foundational pillars of the entire horoscope. Chance, all on its own, had produced a result that was incredibly meaningful within the system he was testing. And this quote just nails his conclusion. He's showing that the universe itself seems to have this weird, poetic principle where random events can line up in these beautiful, meaningful patterns. That's synchronicity. It's when a meaningful coincidence happens that's so perfect, it feels like it must have been planned. But it wasn't. It's the universe basically winking at you, hinting at a hidden connection between your mind and the world out there. So where does all this leave us? Well, that brings us to our final section, Jung's continuing legacy. Because, like we said at the beginning, Jung was a pioneer. He never claimed to have finished the map. What he did was draw the first bold outlines, and then invited the rest of us to keep exploring. Let's just zoom out for a second and appreciate the breathtaking arc of this whole project. He started in a clinic, dealing with the very personal problems of his patients. That work led him to discover the universal, shared structures of the collective unconscious. And that discovery ultimately pushed him to explore synchronicity, a concept that boldly suggests a fundamental, meaningful link between psyche and matter, between our inner world and the outer universe. And the amazing thing is, he knew he wasn't finished, not by a long shot. This slide shows his own vision for where this work needed to go next. He saw endless avenues for future explorers, deeper dives into world mythologies, studying the symbolic power of numbers, bridging the gap between psychology and quantum physics, applying these ideas to art, to history. The map is huge, and most of it is still waiting to be filled in. And so we end here with the question that Jung's entire life's work really leaves us with. It's a question that goes way beyond psychology and deep into the heart of philosophy and even physics. If our inner world and the outer world are not really separate, if they're connected by this mysterious web of meaning, then what does that truly imply about the nature of the reality we all wake up to every single day? That is the unfolding map. That is the great adventure Jung left for us to explore. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.